Hello everyone, Eugenie is here. Today I have two guests. I'm speaking to returning guest Bruno Soos, who is an assistant professor at Department of Biological Psychology, Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. Hello Bruno, thank you for coming today on the show.
Hello, my pleasure.
And we also have Nikki Hubers, who is a PhD student at Department of Biological Psychology at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. Hi Nikki, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So Bruno, we already had an episode with you back in April 2022. However, for those who may have missed it, could you please provide a concise overview of yourself?
Yes, sure. I am, as you said, an assistant professor here at the VU. It's been 2 years now. It will be 2 years next week since I started. My work is mostly on cognitive plasticity, so ways that cognition can change during development and in adults as well. And I think, before I was, and I think we'll talk about it more, but before I've been in Sweden as a postdoc, and then before in the US as a PhD student and master's students, and I am Brazilian.
Yes, so I guess we'll cover these things during today's podcast. Thank you. And Nikki, could you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes, so I'm a PhD student at the department, and I'm also here for 2 years next week because Bruno and I actually started on the same day at this department.
Mm-hmm.
And my PhD focuses on the etiology of twinning, so how twin pregnancies arise, and how I got there. I will tell you a bit more about that in the presentation later.
Okay, thank you very much. So for this episode, we actually received also quite some questions from listeners. Let's dive right into it. You have also a very nice presentation that you've done during summer course here at Vrije Universiteit. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, we can start with so this presentation, we created the presentation, me, Nikki, and Dr. Wunu. So she was not able to present during the summer school. And she's not here today, but I think it's also good to mention. So this we had during the summer school. It was a summer course about more focus on behavior genetics, human genetics, but we also found it good for the students because most of them were early PhD students or late bachelors and masters around that phase in their careers. So we also think it's good to give a presentation about academic life. And the slides I started with like some silliness stuff about the name of academia that it traces back to Plato's School of Philosophy. That's not very important. As I said, that's what our hope that they will get, and this maybe listeners will also get from this, is that they will learn more about academic careers and people thinking about their own career choices. We started by talking about the stages of academia, just to establish so everyone is on the same page and how usually goes from bachelor's to master's to PhD to postdoc to assistant professor, associate professor, and then full professor.
Yes, basically we'll cover the stages today during the podcast. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more and tell you about my academic path so far. So I started a bachelor's degree here at the Vrije University, the Vrije Universiteit in Health and Life Sciences. And when I got to my third year, I was looking around for which masters I would like to do. And in the Netherlands, you usually have two choices. You can do a research master or a regular master. And there are some differences between those. In a regular master, you only take normally about 1 year. And you focus a lot on topics, but research is usually only a small part of it. So maybe like 6 ECs, and you have one short research project. Whereas you do a research master, it usually takes 2 years, so a bit longer, and the emphasis is way more on research, which means that you usually have at least least one, but usually two big research projects by yourself. So that can be 30 or 60 ECs even. Yeah, and that's a really big difference in those masters. And if you choose a master, you kind of already have to think inside your head, like, what am I going to do after the master's? Do I want to do something a bit more research focused, or is research not that important to me? But that's also to say, like, you can also get into research if you have done a regular master's, and also get into something else or more into other industries if you've done a research master. So you're not set in stone, but it usually helps a bit to think, what do I want to do afterwards. The selection for research masters can be quite strict. They will usually select on grades, motivation letters, sometimes even reference letters. But don't let it scare you, just apply and you'll see where it gets you. Can go to the next slide. Yeah, there are some international differences about how masters and PhDs usually work. So I can only talk about PhD work from the Netherlands, but also a bit around it because I have looked a bit around. In the Netherlands, a PhD is usually considered a job and something that you would do after you've completed a master's degree. So that can be either a regular or a research master. Whereas in other countries, sometimes while you do your PhD, you're also getting a master's education. Bruno, can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, good segue. Yeah, in the US, which is where I did my PhD, most universities, especially the bigger ones, they would do a package, master's and PhD combined. So once you apply to a program, you would do both at the same time. And you are considered, in the US, you're considered a worker, but because of your work as a teaching assistant, and it's very, very, very common in the US for people to get paid as to have a PhD and fund their own PhD as a teaching assistant, like the position you're usually employed by the department, not by a professor under a specific grant. It's by the department, and then that money that pays your tuition and pays your salary is, on paper, is for your teaching assistantship, but it's kind of like an agreement that everyone knows that most of your actual work and hours spent is going to be on research. Because teaching, you're usually doing like much less. But of course, there are also varies. In the US, there are also people that enter as with a specific grant, more like here under a specific professor already. That's more rare. You usually start without a lab, without even starting with a professor, and then the first year or so you have rotation system where you go to multiple different labs. You need to try different labs mandatorily, and then you later go to the lab that you want to do your thesis, your PhD thesis with.
So, and you said that that you actually work much more on research. Like, can you mention the split, approximately 20/80, 60/40, what the split?
Yeah, it's about, I think it's about 10/90.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So really, on the paper, it's, you teach, but basically you're just doing research.
Yeah, because on paper, it's like you cannot go above 15 hours per week, but yeah, in fact, it's less than that usually. And in the US, it's not, your PhD hours are not 40, more like 60, 70.
So the reality is different.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we will talk about work-life balance, I guess, afterwards. So we'll touch the topic for sure.
But in other countries, I know that in Brazil, for example, a PhD student is much more of a student. Because I think here in the Netherlands and in the US as well, it's more of a misnomer to call a PhD student a student. You're mostly a researcher and a bit of a teacher. But yeah, in Brazil, you are still considered a student. You don't pay taxes. You're still under fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have a salary per se. So you don't get workers' right either, any rights. You're still part of the student body. You're still participating in all the student activities.
Mm-hmm. So it's very, very different.
National
yeah.
stuff. You're still considered very much a student on paper as well.
So,
yeah, so it varies.
Yeah, per
so
country.
I think it's an
Yes.
important
Disclaimer.
distinction to know.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so when you are in the final stage of your master or even your bachelor, you can consider finding a PhD if you think you would like to pursue a career in academia. There's a couple of possibilities. There are some websites out there, such as Academic Transfer or findaphd.com, where you can look for PhD positions. Well, Twitter or X used to be a good resource for finding positions as well. And I think the best tip that I would have was just talking to professors or teachers that you like, and also the topic that they are teaching, that if that's interesting to you, you can just talk to them and say like, hey, I'm really interested in that, and I'm thinking about PhD. Do you know anybody in similar topic that has a position opening up anytime soon? Yeah, and the same can go, you can also skip the middleman, skip the teacher, and just contact a potential supervisor directly. If there's somebody in the field that you like, just send emails to them or contact them and be like, hey, I'm super interested in this topic. Do you know of any positions anytime soon? Another way that you can go is just write your own fellowship application. This is not as common as it is in the Netherlands, but it is very common in other countries such as Australia. It's much more common that you first write your own fellowship application. Usually you will already have some contacts with a potential supervisor for that. And if you get the funding, you will have your own fellowship that you can use to do your PhD. Let me think. Right, we have some tips about what you should consider and you should not really consider when looking for PhD. The most important thing we think is finding a supervisor that suits you. So you have a good connection with, and you just kind of know what you can expect from them, and they know what they can expect from you. Other things that we think are not as important is the quality or the ranking of the university. For example, if you see a very interesting position at Harvard University, but you know that the lab and the supervisors are maybe a bit shitty, then maybe not go for that. Then it's just way more important to have a workplace and a supervisor that you actually enjoy working with. That will help you way more in the long run.
Yeah, the program matters much more, and especially the professor and supervisor going to be under. And I have colleagues and friends who had a terrible experience because they were choosing by just ranking, which is something that at bachelor level people do more often. And I guess at that level, it's a good heuristics of sorts to also look at quality of the university overall. But by the point you're doing a PhD, it gets so specific that general rankings are just a bad proxy for what's going to be your experience. It just doesn't matter as much.
Probably meant that you didn't do your job to like explore actually what you want to do. Really.
Yeah, because you will be kind of stuck for this position for 3 or 4 years, so you don't really want to be in a position where you don't feel comfortable for all that time.
Is it also possible to switch, like you started a PhD position, then to switch to another university if you realize, oh, this is a not good fit, or it's like very complicated? Basically, the whole process all over again, right?
Well, for most positions here in the Netherlands, it can be quite difficult to switch because usually the funding comes from a specific supervisor or department. So that makes it quite hard to switch. Whether I don't really know how it is when you have your own funding, then I can imagine that it would be a bit easier to maybe do one project with one supervisor and department and switch to another one.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, here it's very hard. In Sweden, I also have experience in. It's very hard too because of what Nikki said, because you start under a professor's grant
Yeah, yeah.
for that project, for a specific set of projects. So then moving to other professors, even in the same department, is much, much harder. In the US, it's easier. It's not easy. It's still like a headache, but you see happening because you're funding. Again, the department is your boss. It's the entity that pays your salary, while here, the professor, the supervisor is your boss. So there, it is more possible because then the department can just say, oh, then you should try this professor and this other professor. So you see that happen. But it's also rare.
And can we talk a little bit the procedure as well? So how important is your GPA? Like you probably apply with a motivation letter, how the procedure looks like. I guess it's different country by country and by university, but still like how it was for you.
Oh, yeah, I think somewhere in the presentation there's my row.
Should I?
Yeah, great. It comes now. Because I applied for 3 PhD positions. So I said I first did a bachelor at the Vrije University, then I did a master, and I eventually chose for a research master. And then by the beginning of my second year of the research master, I was pretty convinced that I wanted to stay in academia and wanted to do a PhD. If you go to the next slide, one more. Yeah, so this is also a little bit more why I decided to do a PhD. Well, that was mostly because I know that I really liked science and I wanted to teach eventually at universities, and then a PhD is really the way to go. So I started looking for a lot of things, and then I saw 3 jobs that are PhD positions that I was very interested in. I think they're mentioned on the next slide. Yes. So the first step usually is writing an application that usually consists of your CV, which will also include a grade list of all the courses that you took. Motivation letter is also important, and usually some reference letters from teachers that you have had before. So one position that was on cancer research, I was rejected by the letter, which happens, especially cancer research is not really that we cover in the masters that I did, so it did make sense that this position wasn't for me. Then with a second position focusing on Alzheimer at the University of Leuven, I was invited to have an interview. I first had an interview with the main professor that was going to lead the project. And after that, there were some people that were rejected and some people that were put through to the next round. And I was put through to the next round. And then I had a whole day of interviews. This was a very intense process, and it's not, I don't think it reflects how it would usually go. But in this case, I had interviews from 9 in the morning till like 3 in the afternoon with all the people that were working in the lab. It was very intense, but it was also very nice because it gave me the opportunity to talk to all the PIs and the professors that are involved, but also to some postdocs and PhDs that are working at the department, which also allowed me to ask some questions like how is the hierarchy and the structure of the department and how is the ambience here. So
so you had insight right away as well.
Yeah, I was able to ask my questions. So it was a lot of conversations of how well would you fit into this department. So after all that, and a couple of weeks later, I was offered that position. But in the meanwhile, I was also talking to my supervisors from my thesis project here at the VU. And when I told them about this position, they said, wait, don't say yes, because we also have an offering for you. And that process was way easier. I had a conversation with my main supervisors and then with 2 other supervisors just about the position and how everything was supposed to look well if I would decide to do this PhD. And then after just those 2 conversations, they offered me the position. So that was way easier. And then I had to decide, and there were a couple of things that I found very important to decide upon. First of all, the subject. So what I'll be working on, well, that would be Alzheimer or the etiology of twinning, so how twin pregnancies arise. And I found both of those equally interesting, so that didn't really matter much. Then the second thing that I looked at was the people I was going to work at. And because I already knew all of my supervisors here at the department, because I did my master's here, I knew that the environment here was very nice, and I really liked all the people that I was going to work with. So that was a win for them. But there's the other one I just didn't know as much. I also really wanted to have opportunities to go abroad, and they were offered at both positions, so I was indifferent on that one. And one thing that was really important for me was to have teaching opportunities. And here at this department, we're working at the university, so here there were a lot of opportunities to teach. Whereas at the other position, it was more of a research institute that was had a close relationship with the university, but was not a university themselves. So there would not be as much opportunities to teach. So that was a win for the department here. And also locations. I've been living in Amsterdam for 6 years, and it was easier not to move than move to Belgium. So considering all that, I decided to take the position here in Amsterdam at the department rather than to move abroad. So that was kind of my process of how to get PhD position.
Here in the Vrije Universiteit.
Yeah. Yeah, I can talk about this now, about how a PhD.
Yes, if you can talk a little bit how actually the PhD looks like, how your week is split, and what you do on a weekly basis, maybe from our perspective.
Yes, that's all right. So my PhD is for 4 years, and my contract is actually for 38 hours. A usual full-time position here in the Netherlands would be 36 hours, but I choose like the plus option. So on paper, I work 38 hours and I build up extra vacation days by that. But I will say that I tend to work more than 38 hours a week. I think it's more closely somewhere between 40 and 45 hours a week. So it's not as bad. And what I usually do in a week is work on my research projects. So that would mean I could do some analysis in R, I could be writing a paper, but it also includes a lot of different things, like preparing for conferences to go to, writing abstracts for that, or preparing presentations or posters. You also have a lot of things that are not really related to your project directly. So you could have some defenses from colleagues that are done with their PhD. You can help them prep with that, or with some mock defenses. Bruno is preparing for one later this week. And you could also have some teaching activities. So, for example, I teach one class every year about epigenetics, and one of my supervisors asked me to do it, and I'm her teacher's assistant, so I don't really give lectures yet, but I help with all the
preparation.
And the practicals, and with the I'm thinking of the word grading, so stuff like that. So and I've sometimes been asked to give guest lectures at other universities or schools as well. So those are the things that I would usually do.
Can you also do tutoring? Like, can you say that I want to maybe participate and be a tutor?
Yes, there are some PhD students that work also as a tutor, and then you would actually get another contract or an additional contract that will say how much of your time you will spend on tutoring and
how much on other things.
Yes, so then your contract will actually change a bit, and you usually get a bit of extra time added to your PhD because you don't work all the hours that you normally would. And then also your salary changes a bit, because now I'm only paid based on the fact that I'm a PhD student. But if you're a PhD student and a tutor, some of your salary will come from the fund that's granting your PhD, and also some will come from the department because you're also working
So
as a tutor.
just to understand, so it will be a little bit higher, yeah, I guess, right? If you teach or not.
I
Or
don't
depends.
necessarily think so.
Uh-huh.
It's just the money that comes from your PhD funding every month is a bit lower because you don't work as much hours.
Okay.
So that's also how you could have some extra time because there still be some funding left for your PhD, so you can work a little bit longer.
Oh, okay.
I think it works like that, at least for some colleagues that I know. But I'm not doing that. I'm just teaching like as an extra activity. And also during your PhD, you have to obtain 30 ECs in classes that you follow yourself. And teaching activities that I can use those for ECs. So if I teach for 30 hours, I've gained 1 EC for my 30 ECs. So that's also one thing that I could do during a week is follow a course. So
maybe a little bit of topic question or like a stupid question. Can you finish a PhD like less than 4 years, or it's impossible? Have you heard of this?
Well, you can. There were some people from a department that did that this years because they were offered some postdocs positions, so they just finished off their PhD earlier. But you do have to meet the requirements for finishing a PhD. So, for example, here you would have to publish or have published at least 2 papers and have 1 submitted, and then write an introduction and discussion. So here our PhD theses are very publication based, whereas in other places not as common anymore, where you can just write 1 big kind of book or thesis.
So requirements are different again by place.
Yeah, it is becoming more rare, the full thesis format, and the publication focus is becoming the standard, but I know there's some places that are still doing that.
Yeah, but so if you have all the requirements, you can finish your PhD if you really want to. But usually for most people, 4 years is already very
intense.
Yes, especially if you have data collection, because that can take up to 1 or 2 years, and then you still have to write all of the publications from that. So it can happen, but it's very rare.
And 2 papers means 2 research questions, 2 research projects.
Yeah, so just 2 papers that are published in
peer review papers.
So basically, it's 2 different projects in a sense, or it.
Yeah, well, it depends. A paper, if it's an enormous project, then it will create multiple papers over its lifetime. The project is like a 10-year project that you, as a PhD, you join in the middle, and then you still can get a couple of papers out of it. But usually, different projects.
And I guess you are also not limited. You can do more, or
yes, you can do how much as you like. But
I mean.
We've had some instances at our department last year that were crazy, that people had like 8 or 9 papers in there, and everybody
extremes exist.
Very extreme, but everybody at the department was saying, please don't see this as the standard, because you really don't have to do all this, and don't put that much pressure on yourself. You don't need it to.
Which ends up with huge thesis as well.
Book.
Really book like 500 pages. So can happen, but please don't do it to yourself.
Better not. Who will read it, right? Afterwards.
Yes.
Also need to think about it. Can you talk a little bit about what challenges have you faced during the PhD journey and how you overcome them?
Yes. Well, I think at the first point of this slide sums it up. It feels like you're just doing a long internship and you don't have many deadlines, because all the responsibility is now fallen upon yourself to finish a PhD in 4 years. And in between those 4 years, there's no deadlines at all. You just have to kind of figure it out yourself. So it can be very unstructured. And another challenge that I had is that things sometimes take a lot of time. Like before you have all your data, or your data is prepared enough to do the analysis, or when you're writing and you're waiting on a review, it can take so long. So you think, I can finish this project in half a year, and then you end up spending 2 or 3 years on it. And
And it's like those studies in psychology of delayed gratification, where money, people, participants are giving money now or money like in an hour or two, and you see that curve of the worth of the money getting lower and lower. PhD is like extreme case of that, because the delay is very long of everything you do. You're only gonna see the fruits of it much later in a paper or in a conference or
tips how to overcome them, because I can imagine procrastination could be a thing there as well.
It is. Well, one thing I did was talking with my supervisor and be like, this really annoys me. How can I get around it? And they're like, well, part of it is just, it's part of it. So you kind of have to get used to things taking time, and don't feel bad yourself. Like if something takes a little bit more time, it's not that you're not being productive enough or whatever. It's just things take time, and do it correctly. It's okay. And one other thing that we also try to do a lot here at the department is celebrate even small victories. So if you have submitted a paper, or when it has been accepted for review, or if your abstracts, you're allowed to present a poster on a conference. Celebrate these things, like really tell them to your colleagues and have a drink or
helps a lot. It's very important. And academic culture doesn't have that in it usually. Our department is good at it, but most places you won't find people celebrating these small things because they think it's silly. I don't think it's silly at all. And I see that in industry. Like companies celebrate the small victories all the time and give feedback and constant praise to their employees, and we just never get that as academics. Even when a paper is published, the max you see is like some professors, if it's not like a widely popular paper, if it's a standard paper that gets average attention, you only see like a few professors writing to you. It's like, oh, this is a good paper. Yeah, this is very interesting. But most of the time, it's not going to be a huge feedback.
I can also imagine it can be quite lonely, because comparing to, let's say, bachelor studies or masters, where it's like more people, you can be working together maybe on some projects. I'm not sure how it is during PhD. Is it mostly you're working alone, or
working on your own project? Especially, for example, for me, I'm working on twinning, and I'm using methods that nobody else in the department is using. And also my subject, the department that we are is biological psychology. Twinning has absolutely nothing to do with psychology, so I'm really on an island by myself. But still, if you talk to your peers, you will find that you're actually going through the same struggles, and the same challenges come up. So it's here very nice at the department. We have 2 big rooms where all the PhD students are sitting together. And it really helps to find each other and connect, and just sometimes complain or make fun of things that happen to everybody. So I think that helps, just talking to your peers and making friendships and good connections with them as well.
So everyone is going through the same process, just the topic is different.
Yes,
more or less.
basically.
Okay.
Yeah, which is also a good thing when you're looking for PhD programs, to see how it is the PhD life inside a department, how much interaction there is. Some programs will have very little. I think our department has a lot, and even the rooms are shared, the big rooms where you're all talking a lot, socializing, which is excellent. Some places you're going to be isolated, even in that sense as well. Not only in your own research, because it's your own research, but also in the social part of it. You're only going to see other people once a week or even less. Because you're in a lab or in your office, and the office has like 1 or 2 students from that lab. So you're not almost never seeing students from other labs, which is very common. So this also makes a difference. And social activities as well, and social events, which our department is very good at too. But some departments don't do anything. So that also makes a difference in your experience and mental health.
Oh yes, that's one of the things that's maybe we can cover right away. So can you share like how the work-life balance for you was during your career so far?
Well, maybe we can go to the slides that you have about the mental stress. So
we put together some.
Yeah, we have some recommendations on stuff.
Yeah, here.
Yeah, scarcity and mental health. Yeah, I think that's an ugly side of academia that is not usually mentioned. And when through most of my trajectory in academia, I didn't know any of that. I only got to know that like much later during my postdoc. I was like, wow, that's kind of late. But the scarcity is becoming harder and harder to continue in the academic career. What I mean by that is, by academic career, we mean that path from master's to PhD to then do a postdoc and then find a professor position in a university. Is that the only path? Absolutely not. There are many other paths you can do after getting a PhD, for example. In industry, I'm working with the government. But that's the academic path. And that's the path that a lot of people want to do when they're starting their PhDs. But as you can see in the slide, in the survey in the UK of PhD holders, so people who already got their PhD, they are doctors. Of those people, only 3.5% get later a permanent job in academia. And of that total of PhD holders, only
less than 0.5%, yeah.
5%, less than half a percent become full professors. So it is a very small percentage, and it's a bit crazy. And it's lucky that there are other opportunities and more are opening up with time in industry and government and nonprofits and so on. But it's a crazy thing to think that a PhD, which was in the past was originally meant as a training ground for academic positions, that only 3% of people will get the position at the end. It would be like if you went through medical school or worked in a hospital, right, during residency. And of those people, only 3% became physicians, like got to work in a hospital.
Crazy.
That would be crazy. No one would do it.
Yeah. I do think it's, at least here in the Netherlands, they're trying to make it a little bit better. So you would get a fixed contract or earlier on in your career, but those changes are relatively slow. They are trying.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, and my position is thanks to those initiatives. My current position here in the Netherlands, because the Netherlands is trying to make it better and get people to get permanent positions earlier. But it's a gradual change, slow. So it is definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Because if you, or at least to have a more open mind about other options. Because if you go strictly with this thinking that, oh, I want to be a researcher in a university, it's going to be very hard.
Yeah, and that also kind of leads us to the mental health problems, because this is one of the causes of it, the constant kind of stress that you're under, like, am I going to have a job in a couple of years, or will I not receive any funding for that?
Yeah.
So basically the uncertainty is actually very, very high.
Unstable, lack of perspective for your future.
Was it does it also maybe add to it the a lot of work hours that you actually put into it, or you need to really then drill a lot and work to be better than others, or so I mean it's not only uncertainty, I guess, but
there were some things going on that's like how well you were doing at your job or at your position were kind of based on how much you were publishing, stuff like that. So that, of course, really puts a lot of pressure on you to work productive and to keep producing output all the time. So that really takes a toll on your mental health as well. There are also kind of steering away a bit from that. So it's not just publication based, how well you are doing at your job, but also taking in all the other activities that you're doing, such as teaching and supervising of students, and so little or a bit less emphasis on just how much you publish.
Though it is still the major criteria, but it is, Nikki is right. And luckily it is changing. You know, more things are taken into account. But because of that, and because it's so, you're working on your own project, and there's not much oversight, because the money is coming at the end of the day from the agencies, usually from governments, and they're not like visiting labs and looking how things are going. There's no oversight, right? So the sky is the limit in the bad sense, because then people are just like, oh yeah, I'll work as much as I can possibly do, like physically work. And it creates this bad culture, both because of how competitive the environment is in academia, but also because I call it a passion career, like the arts. And like the arts, we end up being very exploited because we are so passionate and naive, and we do it for the fun of it. And we just think, of course, like, oh, you invited me to review this one other paper that I just reviewed like a bunch this month. Yeah, sure, I'll just do it again, like just for the ideology of it, because I think science is great and all that. I want to participate. And it's very easy to be exploited in those circumstances. Same as artists. I think the analogy is good.
Yeah, it's interesting. We are in psychology department. I mean, and then we're talking about mental health, and I can see that burnout is very easy to get here. I mean, not here, but I mean, just in general in academia. Yeah, it's so like, do you have tips how to then overcome it, and what to do? Like, how you balance?
Yeah, before we get into that, these slides, they just show a report from a recent report from this year, from Nature, the journal. Is it Nature? I forgot. Yeah. And just describing how bad the situation is in science.
Yeah, basically the anxiety and depression.
Six times of depression and anxiety, 6 times
comparing the general population.
Which is a lot more.
I think we also had some tips in one of the slides. Yes. Yeah, so one of the things that I already mentioned is like you don't have a lot of structure or deadlines during your PhD or in academia overall. You're really set free and just do whatever works for you, which can be quite nice, because I know some people that love to work during the evening, so they do that more and don't work in the mornings or not work the normal 9 to 5. So that works for some people, but if you're not one of those, we think it is very helpful to make a structured routine for yourself, and also in your work. So try to schedule some things and make plannings. I know that's always super annoying thing to hear, like if you're struggling with stuff, just make a planning, but it does actually
it does work.
It does work a little bit. And the other thing that we mentioned is celebrate the small victories, and that really helps to keep you motivated and keeps you working on.
But the calendar is a great suggestion. To have actually have a calendar where you put stuff that you're going to do. It will look completely arbitrary, and it is, but that's the point, because everything will feel arbitrary during your PhD.
So it's up to you
as a professor, because a lot of things it's not an external force that is demanding time from you. Unlike in the industry, where most of the things that you have, the structure you have, is given to you, is structured by someone else higher up. But in academia, even as a master's student, many supervisors won't give you that much structure either. It's like just part of academic life. And a PhD student, your supervisor also is not going to say like, oh, right, like they won't say, oh, Nikki, here's like what you're going to do on Monday. This is what you're going to do on Tuesday. I want to see this on Wednesday. There's none of that, or very little of that. So doing it yourself, even though it will look arbitrary because you're the one creating, you're become your own boss, but it is very important.
You need to be self-organized, really.
Yeah, and then also one very important thing is the work-life balance that you asked a couple of times about. So what I do is I try to stick to the 40-hour work week as much as I can. So don't work more hours than that. And when I'm off in the weekends or in the evening, try to avoid checking all my emails and just really taking a break from it. And sometimes it can be a bit hard because if you have conferences or anything, those tend to be in the weekends. But then you've worked one of your days, so you've worked for 8 hours. That means that, for example, on the Monday after or Tuesday or whichever day suits you, you don't really have to work anymore because you have already done the hours of that day. So that's how I try to balance it. And what also really helps is having a nice support system or people around you that don't work in academia. And try to stick to the schedule that they are working, and also just plan a lot of fun stuff or workouts or whatever you do that makes you happy and recharge again and get your mind off of work. And also,
that's a great tip.
Yeah.
I wish I had done that in the PhD. All my friends were in academia.
Be exposed to outside life, not only be in a bubble.
Yes. Well, that must be more difficult if you are an international student, because I do my PhD in the city that I've been living in for 6 years, and that was also one of the things that I was considering. So I already have my support system in place by the time that I start working. And if you're an international, you have to
do it all over again.
Yes, while you are doing a very intense PhD job as well. So.
But I remember from our previous podcast, actually, Bruno, you mentioned that you like to have change, right? So actually, for you, that was, I don't know, part of it. Why you were moving.
The moving around.
Yes.
Because I like that.
But the downside, then no support system.
And moving fields and so on, I did.
But you do get to meet a lot of very interesting and cool people from all over the world that like the same things that you like, or at least like science in the way that you like it. So that can also be very nice. But it's nice to have at least some people that you can always
for sure. That's a great tip.
And also those people can help you celebrate the small victories. Like my partner, for example, when my first paper was published, he printed it out and now it's hanging on our wall to be like, celebrate that you are a published researcher now.
And I guess you also get a reality check sometimes. If you're telling about your struggles. Now I do have more friends, and I did someone outside of academia. And I have more contact with people outside of academia, and sometimes it will, for them, when I'm talking about it, it will look very like, what? Like why is that happening? I was like, oh yeah, that's not like just life. It's just it can be different. Like other people outside academia do this differently.
Although to be fair, also already have this when Bruno tells stories about his time in the US, because the culture there is just way different. And people expect you to work way more than 40 hours. While here in Netherlands, and I think also some other places in Europe, it's a bit more normalized to just work that.
I'll never forget my first week after I finished my PhD and moved to Sweden as a postdoc. On a Friday of my first week, people in my lab were having lunch. And someone asked, oh, so what are you guys doing for the weekend? And I was the first to reply. And I said, oh, I'm going to start preparing things for the presentation on Monday. And then I swear, I still remember very clearly, one of the postdocs, more senior postdoc, stopped immediately and said, Bruno, we do not work on weekends.
No, don't do it.
And said like that, very emphatic, because, and she knew I was coming from the US, so I think she was like, just cutting it off like this coach, this is not going to happen here, and don't start this, because we do not work on weekends. And I was so used to that because it's so much part of US culture during your PhD that for me, I never even thought of not working. during weekends. Well, it sounds crazy now, but that's just the way it was there. It's just completely expected that you'll be working in the weekends and going to lab even. So, sometimes even weekends during the evening, you'll be there like 8 p.m. in a Saturday, 9 p.m., 10 p.m. Sundays for sure, you're also expected to be there.
Yeah. Was it hard for you to switch then to European style?
No.
Like, what did you do? What did you do that weekend? Do you remember?
No, it was not hard at all. It was much better to have a weekend.
Like, finally, I can open the book.
To be fair, it took a while because I always felt guilty that I was, well, the first few months I felt guilty that I was not working, I was not producing. But yeah, I think it's the kind of thing that it's easier to get used to than the opposite. Right? I imagine someone who did their PhD here and now they go do their postdoc in the US. That's a harder sell.
Yeah. So
to
listeners, if you're planning
you have
that,
no weekends anymore.
Like,
expect everyone in the lab to be there like Saturday and Sunday to collect data and run projects.
Yeah, weekend's just another weekday, basically work day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Holidays as well. Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Well, that's the final tip that we had is like because I work 38 hours in my contract instead of 36, I have about 40 holidays or off days during a year, which is quite a lot. But it's also very nice to just take them because you have them and you are allowed to take them, so you should just do it. For example, I had a work visit in Australia, and after that, I planned 5 weeks off in New Zealand, where I had like limited reception and my phone was not working on time. And it was great because I had 5 weeks completely off, and then I came back all relaxed and all completely
recharged,
motivated to get going again. So if you have the days, take them.
Yeah.
True. Okay, nice. So we honestly, this was one of the questions again from a couple of people. What about salary? Like, because some people said, okay, we want to work in academia, but we're also afraid that we just cannot live from it. So can you talk a little bit about the money and the important thing that you don't need to also take another job, I don't know, next to it or something like that?
Well, that also really depends where you are doing your PhD. Because, like I said, here in the Netherlands, a PhD is considered a job, so you will get paid accordingly. So when you are in your second or third year of your PhD, you will have a salary that is similar to the normal or the average salary in the Netherlands. So that's very, very decent, and you can definitely live from that, even living in Amsterdam, so expensive city. It is very much doable to live from PhD salary here. Whether if you are working, for example, Australia or in the US, when you have your own funding, so you've got a grant to do a PhD, you have your own funding, the salary will usually be much lower. You are not really considered an employee of the university. So there, the money can be quite low, and you would actually have to have a job.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In the US, it will vary a lot from state to state. They will have their own. For me, I was lucky because in my university, Rutgers University, we had a very strong union for PhD students. So we always, like the union always
negotiated,
pushed the salary up. So we had a good salary. It was close to the median of the state as well. Which is, as Nikki said, it is good, and it is, I could live just fine. But you won't make big bucks either.
You won't make as
you
much.
Won't be rich.
you won't make as much as if you work with the same degree and the same number of hours in an industry.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's the problem.
Yeah.
Because when we say, oh, we are making the same as the median in a country or in a state, well, it is good, but at the same time, the medium doesn't have the same years of education as you put in.
Yeah,
that's true.
So that's the unfair part, right? That you if you compare yourself not to the whole country, but if you compare yourself only to people with the same levels of education as you, academics are the lowest,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
one
yeah,
of the
yeah.
lowest in the gradient. We're one of the worst paid jobs
Yeah.
by education.
This is also a bit where the thing that you mentioned, that it is a passion work.
Yeah.
Comes in.
Artist work, yeah,
Yes.
totally. It's like
Yeah.
you can really
Yeah,
compare it like
exactly,
this. Yeah.
Because and it's a systemic problem. We just don't, it's part of our culture, and because it's a passion work, we just never think of money that much. Like as long as we're being like paid enough and like pay rent and food, we're fine-ish with it. There's not much push for better salaries or better conditions or better anything. For example, the renegotiating salary is not a thing in academia. You almost never hear people doing it. It's just not a thing people do.
Especially for PhD student, like the salary is just fixed for everybody.
Yeah.
So
even though it's like we could, right? It is a thing that could happen. And when I tell my friends from in industry, they are always shocked by it. That there's
no such a thing.
I have a friend, for example, he renegotiates or negotiates when he's starting aggressively. Like he gets like way more all the time, and every year he renegotiates it. It's not a thing that happens in academia, in part because of the passion, also in part because the funding is coming from so far away, right? It's coming from funding agencies and the government that it's like hard to like, because you don't talk to them, then you talk to
especially if you work on a fixed ground, like
yeah,
you can say I want to get paid more, but the
there's
ground
like,
is there's no more money.
There's no more money. There's no more money. It's harder to. It's less flexible, the budget in academia as well. But silly things. I remember one thing that I never thought about until last year. I was visiting a friend of mine who works in Nijmegen, and we were having drinks with postdocs and PhD students from his lab. And a postdoc people were making fun of him because he always wanted to fly to conferences in business. And I remember also when I heard that in the bar, I was like, oh, that's ridiculous. But then he made a very good point, which is like business class is exactly for work trips, for people who are working and fly for work and not for pleasure. Why the heck should we not fly business? And I was like, I mean, there are many more problems in academia until we get to business class. But I think just the fact that I never even consider that is telling. That I always consider myself not worthy to fly business when I'm flying to a conference.
And as you pointed out,
which is for any other worker with the same level of education. Obviously, they're gonna require business. If you're flying to
especially longer destinations,
a work meeting, you're gonna say, fuck no, I'm not gonna fly economy because I need to like fly with a suit or have like my laptop. I want to do work and have some space.
You're presenting, you're working. It's not like you just need flip-flops and you know.
So they always be saying like, they better pay me business. But here, like, it's not even crossed my mind.
I'm just curious, did it work out for him? Did he always get a business? Or okay. So that's possible again. Maybe try it out.
Get him.
Okay, interesting. So maybe we can switch the gears a little bit, and Bruno, you can talk a little bit about how you pursue your career in academia. So what was the path for you?
So I started. I did my
change the slides to.
I think that might help. So I started. My bachelor's was in Brazil. It was a city not where I'm from. It's not too far. Well, for Brazilian standards, not too far either. It was like 6 hours from my hometown. And I did a bachelor's in biology. And then I did a master's there in genetics. It was more like molecular genetics and evolution. Nothing at all related to psychology. I think we talked about it last time. So
but still, for some people who haven't listened, so yes.
But just to briefly mention, then I fell in love with psychology. Then I also knew that I wanted to leave Brazil and do somewhere else and explore, like try other places. So then I applied to a bunch of places, which was hard, especially because I didn't know anyone. Well, in fact, I did know my supervisor during my master's and my bachelor's internship. She did work in, I think she did her PhD, in the US, but that was like longer ago. And another professor in my department also did a PhD in the US. That was like longer ago, and it was in a different area than what I needed to do. But those were the two people that I knew that did anything outside of Brazil. So I felt very like lost as well. And I didn't know any of these things that we are talking about now, you know, how it works and the applications and the life. So I was just applying blindly and writing professors. And I remember I wrote like a bunch of papers to different universities in the US, in Canada, in the UK, in Germany, in Australia. It was a lot of places. The US was the place that offered more opportunities, especially if you don't have any funding.
And you were applying for PhD positions, right?
Applying for PhD positions, yeah. It's just that then because I then went to the US, I remember I got in, you know, to 6 different places accepted. I think I applied to, I don't know, 12. And then I chose Rutgers, mostly because of the research. I was very interested in the professor. I was very interested in that research. But I also went blindly. Even the interview was, I remember, was on the phone. So I literally did not know how my supervisor looked like. I had like one picture of him, and I didn't know if it was like an old picture or a recent picture. It ended up being a recent picture that I had in the university website, but that was it. So I remember when I landed in the US and went to university, I remember thinking, man, I don't even know how, like, I might even like pass by him, and I don't know how he looks. I didn't know anyone in the US either.
Luckily now we have Zoom or like Skype, and you can do all this at least.
Well, it was not that long ago either. Like we had Skype. It's just that I don't know. They didn't do that.
They preferred to audio.
They preferred more old style interview. Because some for other places I did do Skype interviews. So they also didn't know how I looked either, because I don't think there was even a picture of me anywhere that they could find, because they couldn't Google in Portuguese either. Specifics. So yeah, that was scary, and I remember being the feeling of dread once you like leave the country. And once I left in the airport, the area where only passengers can go in, I was like, I'm like completely alone now. And I was bringing like all my stuff like I ever owned, so I was moving all my stuff together too. But yeah, it works fine. It's just, it takes a bit to get used to. But then because I was in the US, then I did in the package of master's and PhD. I could have transferred my master's, but I decided not to because I was changing fields. It's like, I'm just gonna get another master's, because now it was in psychology. So I got a master's in psychology, and I was working mostly on psychology and neuroscience. So then I got the department was of neuroscience, and then I got my PhD, and then I moved to Sweden. So right after I defended my PhD, I already got a position. I was applying to a couple of places, and I was offered this position in Sweden. I remember being excited too, because I wanted to stay in the US, just because I had created, because I stayed there for 6.5 years, because the PhD is 4 years plus the master's like 2 more years. So I already had built new life and friends and significant others and so on. So it was rough, but I was also excited. I was like, yeah, like new experience, let's go. So I moved to Sweden, and then the same thing again. I didn't know anyone in Sweden, so it was also hard. But then I restarted the whole process and got to meet people and make friends and so on. Got to have a better work-life balance because now I was in Europe, so that was a good change. And yeah, I did a postdoc there at Karolinska Institute for 3 years and a half. I was there. But again, it was challenging because as a postdoc, which I think we didn't talk yet, but as a postdoc, it's pretty much you're a gig researcher. You're like a freelance researcher. You work for specifically for a project, very short contracts, 1 year, 2 years contracts, and then they can get renewed, but it's never certain. So the uncertainty is even higher. The good part of a postdoc is that now, and when I talk to older professors, they usually remember their postdoc phase very fondly, and they like it because you can completely focus on research, and you're already independent enough to do your own stuff or to do more of your own stuff, and you have like the maturity that you acquire from a PhD. Your PhD, and before becoming a professor, where then you have more responsibility to have more stuff that you need to do. There's not only research.
You have freedom finally, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what a lot of people like about postdoc phase, but that's the only thing good about postdoc, because everything of the uncertainty, the salary, is very bad. And a lot of places a postdoc is paid almost as much as a PhD student, or as much as a PhD student. You don't get a raise after you become a doctor. You just same salary, welcome to or when there is an increase, like it's a bit, it's not be a huge increase most of the time. But yeah, and then I worked there, and then I moved to, and then I got offered a position here,
an assistant professor.
As an assistant professor.
And quick question here. So can you skip the postdoc and go from PhD right away to assistant professor, or you obliged
Well,
to
in the 70s, you could very easily. Nowadays, it's extremely rare. I think I know one person, a friend of a friend, who managed to do it. And it would depend on the field as well. I think in mathematics is more common too. Well, it's still rare as far as I know. But in our fields, in life sciences, in mind sciences, it is extremely rare. You
usually take two. You usually have like 2 postdocs jobs, because when you were hired here in the Netherlands, you were also hired as a postdoc, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. It was a temporary. It was assistant professor already, but it was not a permanent position. So it was more like a postdoc with a better salary, and then later I got a permanent position.
Promotion. You get a promotion.
Which is also weird. This phase is also weird because of names of positions, because it can be very confusing. And countries will have different names for stuff and different deals and how long it lasts and so on.
So also navigating it, it's also can be challenging.
Completely confusing.
So,
but yeah, that's my journey.
Your journey so far. So can you also describe how does your week look like compared to PhD students? Yeah, how your week of assistant professor look like? What you do?
Yeah, there is more teaching responsibilities.
So you already lectured, right?
Yeah, so for me, it was not as big of a change from my PhD time, because my PhD was in the US and I was teaching. I was not teaching as much, but I was used to like normal routine of teaching. So I would have courses every semester. The load was much lower. But from my postdoc life, for example, it's very different. Postdoc, I only got to teach one course, and that's because I really pushed to teach it. I really wanted to teach. I was offering a new course. I think this is really cool. It's a topic that a lot of people like.
What
was
was
on
the name of the course? What was it about?
It was like the neurobiology of intelligence, something like that, architectural intelligence. And yeah, it was well received. People liked it, but I really had to like push it because as a postdoc, again, you are a gig researcher and you're hired as a researcher.
Yeah.
So there's fewer opportunities, even fewer than as a PhD student
To teach.
You need to really push it. But yeah, as a professor, you do have to teach. You are expected to do administrative work.
Like taking care of grants, or like what exactly goes into this
Yeah,
administrative
yeah.
work?
Administration can have many faces, many hats that you can wear.
Can you maybe mention?
vary. The thing I do currently is coordinate the bachelor thesis, the projects. So together with a professor from our partner department, cognition, both of us, we are the coordinators of this program, the track, the cognition and James track. And yeah, that's the administration stuff that I do right now, which is not much, to be honest. It can get much worse, and it will probably get worse for me. And yeah, it's mostly the teaching is more of, which I love teaching, so for me it's not a problem. But the way it works officially here and many other places is that most often you have a 50-50 split, teaching and research. Well, administration, I don't know where in that percentage goes, the other, like 110%.
Yeah, exactly.
But then it's 50-50. And it can go, depending on circumstances, it can go as low as 25 in either direction. So it can be 25 teaching, 75 research if you get a lot of research grants, or it can go all the way on the other side to 25 research and 75 teaching. So that's the minimum. So you, as a professor, academic professor, you're always required to do research and always required to teach. In most places, especially universities. So research institutes, like in Karolinska, where I was a postdoc in, well, in Karolinska is weird because they are also officially also a university, but they are very much a research institute. So in those places, or Max Planck as well, in those places you can get away with teaching or almost all teaching, as long as you're doing some guest lectures here and there. Like you don't need to really teach your own course and take hold of and grade and do all of that and create like assignments. You don't need to do that. But in universities, yeah, you're required to do both teaching and research as a professor.
Yeah, but I guess you're enjoying it as well, so that's
yeah, I like both things. So for me, and I knew that all the way back from the start of my PhD, because I was doing both. So I knew it's something I wanted to do.
What about the grants? So like who is responsible for searching for grants, or like how the process looks like, for instance?
As a PhD student, most often is the supervisor who is responsible to deal with grants. I wrote, as a PhD student, I wrote one grant, I think, or two, I don't remember. But yeah, it was.
There are sometimes some smaller grants, like a travel grant or
yeah, true.
Yeah, stuff like that are usually for not as much money and don't take as much work, but will allow you to do a research visit. So you are responsible for those. Yeah, not the big ones.
Yeah, grants that will pay your salary for long term as a PhD student usually not required to do. And there's no pressure for you to write them. As a postdoc, very much. Yeah, you will get pressured into writing grants. I did write a bunch as a postdoc. Got a couple, but most of them just never get. Grants are grueling a lot of times for, even if you're a rock star professor, a lot of times you get your grants rejected. At least from what I talked to the rock star professors, they also complain because I thought it would be different. They're like, oh, for them it must be easy. And they're like, nah.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I get rejected all the time. It's like, what? You get rejected all the time? Yeah.
What chance do I have
Yeah.
then? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Cruel,
for some grants, the chance is actually very small. Like
Yeah,
1%,
yeah.
2%.
Usually around 10 or 5%. Right?
Yeah. Most often.
Okay,
it's like
okay. So it's
exactly
good to have
5%,
percentage.
10%,
Yeah.
which is still very bad because you put a lot of work. to write a
Exactly,
grant.
exactly. For nothing, actually.
It's like
yeah.
weeks and weeks and weeks of work.
Yeah.
Sometimes months, depending on how big the
Yeah,
grant
so
is.
that's also why some or usually people celebrate that they have submitted the grant.
Yeah.
Because that's already an accomplishment in itself, and then getting your grant is so hard. That
Uh-huh,
you just have
uh-huh.
to celebrate already finishing it and submitting
Yeah.
it. So.
So yeah, and quite often, as you said, you got rejected. So it's also
That's part of it.
wow.
Yeah, to accept.
That's really cruel. I mean, honestly,
To
it's
accept failure. Yeah.
Yes.
And
It's also
rejection.
very sad. It's like, well, I don't really have experience with it, but what I've heard is that a lot of people get very excited when writing a grant. Like, I really want to do this research, and then you're already thinking like, how am I going to do this? And yeah, you already have a plan, and it's completely thought out, and then you cannot do it because you don't get the money.
It is so crushing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to be ready to just pivot and change your plans because a lot of grants will not be granted. You'll not get the funding to do the research. So then be ready to be flexible or to start like, to just change your mind quickly or change your move your heart to like slightly different places. If you're very excited about this, but it didn't work, and now you have another opportunity where you're collaborating with someone else that you got a grant, and now you should like maybe move your heart a bit. It's like, well, now this is the thing. I suggest people don't do it too wildly because I've seen also professors burning out because they just go where the money is. I don't recommend that either because there is a point where we are going through all this struggle, which is to work on things that we're interested in.
Yeah, what you want to do,
But at the same time, don't be like completely narrow-minded and be like, no, this is the one thing I want to work on for the next 5 years. This is the project, and if I don't get that, then you're going to be screwed too.
Yeah.
We'll have some flexibility.
Okay, yeah, interesting. So can you also maybe share some experiences with supervising graduate students? As you mentioned right now, you're involved in bachelor students. So
yeah, that's another thing that you're expected to do. Supervise students, every professor.
And also something you usually do without having a lot of experience or qualifications to actually do it.
Yeah.
That's also getting like there are courses now where you can take as PhD students that prepare you to supervise students, but usually the first time it's just like, oh, here you have a student now.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Go figure. Yeah.
We are all very much amateurs at the game of supervising and tutoring, like being mentors of someone. And as Nikki mentioned before, it is a very like one-on-one relationship, right? And as a PhD student, a lot of your life will depend, or your future will depend on that one person, which is why you should choose carefully when you're applying and not look at like rankings and stuff more into who is that person? Is that person a jerk? How does that person work day to day? Like, how did other PhD students who are now already left the lab, how do they think about it? One thing I recommend people when they're looking at PhD programs is to try to talk to some alumni, like people who already left, especially if they left already, because now they don't have strings attached anymore.
They can talk freely.
That can be very insightful. But if you can't, at least talk to people who are in the department already, more senior PhD students. You can get a good sense of it. But we are in the supervisors now looking at the other side of it. Now as supervisors, we don't get much training. And because there's no, as I mentioned before, there's no oversight.
It's up to you.
From the university, or very little from the university, and almost none at all from the funding agencies. People really do whatever they want as supervisors. There's no guidelines, but also almost no limits, which can go very wrong. And I've seen very toxic relationships between supervisor and students because the supervisors are just drunk on power. or because they're very arrogant or prideful. And I was very lucky, and my supervisors were great. But yeah, I have friends who didn't have that luck.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was, from what I've seen from friends and colleagues and things I follow like Reddit, subreddits about academia and about with PG students talking about their experiences as well. And from those things I've seen, I think I was much luckier than the average, and the average is usually rough
Mm-hmm.
with supervisor relationship. There's always some like problems, and it can go all the way to being tragic. Like people really like, I knew friends of friends who will cry every lab meeting, like almost every week, crying in front of the supervisor, just like, no, I'm not moved by this. You should continue your work. You should improve. So it gets really nasty. Now, as for my supervision, because I've done like a few times already, I'm not experienced at that either, but I try to be better than the average. One thing I try to do is to really be flexible according to the students' needs, because students can be very different in their needs. Like some students need more direction and more structure, so I try to help giving them more direction and structure. Some others, they bloom when they have more independence and more freedom to even come up with their own ideas or come up with their own like design and so on. So also
you actually adjust to students. You see what suits to.
I tend to I try to adjust. Though some things I do have as Northern Stars that I try to keep in for all the students, no matter the type of student I get, is that I avoid micromanaging students. That's my personal preference. And what I mean by that is, even if I rather have a paper written by a student that has some flaws, as long as it's not critical flaws, I'd rather have a paper written by a student that has some flaws and just let it, and the student will learn, will get bashed by reviewers, or later like get a lot of rejections from journals, than to micromanage so much that the professor rewrites the thing or redo analysis, so it becomes the professor's work, because the student needs to learn, and I think it's much more important.
Learning process.
And science has this checks on the way anyway for reviewers and editors. So as long as not anything critical flaw that you, as a supervisor, you should absolutely, and your name is in the paper, so you should not let any critical flaws go in. But if there are like stuff that you would have done differently, or it's like it's not really your standard, like up to your standard, if you were writing the paper yourself as a professor, just let it be. Like just let it go. I think it's more important. It's important to keep in mind, and I try to keep that in mind for myself, that the student, when you're the supervisor, the student is the main character. Like you're the supporting role. This is not about you, which is really hard for professors because ego is a thing. And again, with the analogy with artists, we also share that with artists. There is a lot of ego, there's a lot of pride. And when you're sharing work, because the supervisor, your name will be there in the work too, like that will trigger a lot of professors. The pride and the name, they don't want that, but just just keep in mind, at least for me, that's how I do it. And I think it's better how I like to do it. Like the student is the main character.
I can imagine it's quite often the opposite, actually. As you mentioned.
And the other thing I try to give students is chance to expand intellectually. So that means having like meetings where you just talk about papers, even if it's not immediately related to the project or to the research being done. I think that's very important, and the students will usually appreciate that because they are passionate. That's why they're PhD students. They are passionate about science. They are passionate about research. they don't only want to talk about and think about their own projects, because that's a path that can lead to burnout more easily, I think.
Yeah.
So if you try to give more opportunities for the student, especially if you have a bigger lab, so then bringing people to discuss those ideas, I think it helps, and also gives students opportunity to take courses that they want to take, not that are immediately relevant to
Obligated,
your
yeah.
to the
Mhm.
research, because I also see a lot of professors doing it otherwise. And I think personally it's a mistake to only let students take courses completely related in line to their research. No, if they want to take a different course in learn, if they are only doing things on genetics, for example, but they want to learn a bit about psychology, let them take a course
Or
in the
philosophy,
cognitive
yeah.
department or in the other department or in another university, as long as it's not going too far where they're taking 100-hour credits of
Yeah,
courses, but as long as like in a reasonable amount of extra courses, just I like them. I think that's fine.
So thank you. I'm curious also to hear about your trajectory. Then what's your next step in your academic career? Maybe, yeah, if you can share.
Well, so I'm just starting my third year of my PhD, so I have 2 more years to go. But during this year, I'm going to take a course that's called How to Build an Academic Career. So that will help me look through my options. But I am pretty sure that I would like to stay in academia if it's possible. So I think,
Despite all the things that you
despite all
mentioned.
things, it's still fun. I know we sound there are of course some challenges, but it's also, if your heart is in the right place, you will really enjoy and flourish during your work in academia. So I think by the time I come around to my fourth year, halfway through my fourth year, I will start looking for postdoc positions or maybe some postdoc grants that you can apply, for example, at the European Union. But I will also very much talk with my supervisors about that, like what they think should be good opportunities for me. Yeah, those are my next
Yeah,
years.
you still have time.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Bruno?
Well, now for finally in my career, I'll stay for a while, much longer while, which is it's a good feeling also to have permanent position.
Stability, finally.
Yeah, to have a contract that doesn't last for only 2 years or 3 years.
Yeah.
No, my contract, it's open-ended. I remember when that changed in my contract, and then you have the start date and the end date in my contract was like it was like infinite, like forever infinite. And I looked like, wow,
Never saw this
pretty
before.
good. Yeah, so that is good.
Maybe some projects that you want to work on, like you can disclose a little bit about.
Yeah, I intend to do. I am starting collaborations now with people in my department and people from outside as well. Starting out this year, I'm starting research projects in collaborations, which is also very fun and something that in my career I haven't done much collaboration with other departments. My experience was much more within lab or at best within department collaborations. It was only a few collaborations here and there that involved other people. So I'm excited about that and interact more and have more projects in common, work in the same project with other universities and other countries. I think that will be very fun. And that's the thing I'm looking forward the most. And for the teaching, I'm also excited about having more. The courses have been changing since I started teaching here at the VU. So continue changing that, but also getting more involved in the teaching of the master's program. It's also should be fun, and because it's fewer students, that will also be a fun experience that I'm actually more used to. Because before the VU, my biggest classroom was 100 students, and I only taught that like twice, I think, and every other course was 50 or less students, which makes a big difference. And then my first course here had 400 students.
I was
like, whoa, that's a lot more. So a lot has to change. So yeah, there will also be.
And now it will be again.
Which I do like nowadays too. After this experience with a lot of students, I do like teaching these courses too. It's has their own pros and cons.
Okay, thank you very much. Any final notes from your side? I know about academic career. Do it, not do it.
Yeah. If maybe we gave the impression of it being too hard and too negative, don't leave with that impression. I think I try to say that, and Nikki as well, to try to counterbalance, because we know it's a passion career and we know people are already passionate by it, so we try to say those negatives,
more like cautious,
all the passion, to make people think, open their minds to maybe other opportunities during their PhD, or also be aware of potential pitfalls and things they should look for, like the professor and the work-life balance, things they should look out for. But yeah, life in academia is great.
It's great. Yeah. We didn't really touch upon like all the good side of all the for me, all the international collaborations and research visits that you can do, and just how inspiring reading papers from other people can be, and be like, oh, I want to do this. And
and all my friends who from college, well, not all of them, but most of them they now have moved to industry. And when I talk to them, what is the thing you miss the most? Because they also like industry for different reasons. When I ask them, what's the thing you miss the most? It's the freedom to think whatever you want. Just this culture of just discussing like tangents. Like that's what they miss. They say, I just miss like talking about stuff and like talking about like a different, like, a research that just came out, or an idea, or a philosophical thing, or like just a weird thing. That's what they miss, because they don't get that as much in industry. And you get a lot of that here. And if you ask academics like what you would have done otherwise, it's usually a hard thing for people to answer, because it's such a passionate thing. It will be like asking an artist like, oh, what do you have done differently? Well, I don't know. Like for a lot of people, that haven't even occurred to them to have a different life.
Then especially I think you're still planning to continue academic career, so I mean that's otherwise you wouldn't be.
No. Yes.
So no, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, experiences, and advice. Thank you.
I hope it is helpful for listeners.
They can always reach out if they have any other questions.
Yes.
Any tips or anything.
Thank you. We'll put where people can find you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Psychology Inside Out podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to follow and subscribe. You can also find us on Instagram at psychologyinsideout.podcast, where we update our followers on upcoming episodes. Thank you for listening, and until next time.